In this video, we'll show you how you can use Python tools for Visual Studio with Django to develop a simple voting web application. We will first run it locally using a SQLite 3 database. We'll make use of static files such as style sheets and images. We'll show Django template debugging capabilities available on PTVS. We'll switch from the local SQLite 3 database to a SQL Server database running on Windows Azure. We'll look at the Django Shell interactive window. Finally, we'll publish our web application to a Windows Azure website and a Windows Azure cloud service. Let's get started. First, I'm going to create a new Django project. I'll call it tutorial. A new feature in PTVS 2.0 is the support for virtual environments. In order to publish our Django project to Windows Azure website, we need to make use of a virtual environment. So I'm going to create one here. And I'll just keep the default name. We need to use Python 2.7. In the output window here we can see the progress. And the environment was created. Now if I expand this node, I can see that pip is installed in my environment. I'm going to want to install Django next. Install Python package, Django. And that's going to take a little while because there's a few thousand files to install, and we'll be right back. Django was installed successfully in our virtual environment. So the next step is to create a Django application. I'm going to go add Django app. We'll call it polls. And that created a few files for us. We're going to need to add that new application in the list of applications in the settings here. And while I'm here, I'm going to uncomment this line so we get the free Django admin panel. And now I'm going to copy paste some code from my tutorial because it's quite a bit of code to write. I'm going to change the global URLs file here to delegate to a separate URLs. I'm going to create in my polls folder. This is going to be the definition of my models. So a poll has a question, a date, and multiple choices, where each choice has some text and a number of votes. So here is the implementation of the voting. So that's gonna get the object from the database and increment the vote count. It's gonna be a new file. Python file. And since the views for the index, the details of the poll and the results are pretty standard, then we're just going to use the generic list view and detail view. Here I'm going to add a new subdirectory called polls and move that index in there. And that's just so that we can differentiate between multiple index templates if we ever add more web applications or Django applications to our web project. going to define what our admin page looks like. This just tells Django how we want to format the fields that are in our models. So back to the index. This is going to loop on all the polls that we have and display the question with a hyperlink. Detail.html. It's going to be a Django HTML template. And that's going to loop on all the choices and put a radio button and then a submit button. Results.html. So display all the choices and the number of votes. And next we're gonna set up the database and try it out locally. Now let's go update the database settings so that we can create a database. I'm gonna type some of the code so you can see that we have IntelliSense support. Just define some helper variable here. So we're going to use SQLite at first. Save. Okay, so that's just going to create a file in our project directory. Now I'm going to right click on my project and say Django syncdb. So this brings up a console and we can see it's creating the tables and it's asking us to create a super user. Okay, so it's done. We can start debugging. It's going to start the dev server NIE and it tells us there's no polls available. That's our index page. But I can go to the admin page, the credentials I just created, and we'll add a new poll. Do you like Django? Yes, no. Here I'll expand this, put today's date and time, and save that. So now let's go back to our main page and we can see the poll that I just created. Click on it. Do you like Django? Yes, vote. And that worked. Let's look at what we need to change to make use of style sheets in our Django templates. We need to edit our settings and change the definition here of static root. And this is going to tell Django that when it collects the static files, that we want it to store the files in a static folder directly under our project root. And when we get to deploy this project to Azure, PTVS is automatically going to do the collect static file step for you. Now let me create some directories here under our polls app, and we're gonna store our style sheet there under static polls, and that's for the same reason that we created a polls under templates. So if we ever get to have more Django apps in the same project, there's not going to be any conflict. So here we'll create a style sheet. Let's say color dark blue, background, and we're going to use a bitmap for the background. I specified I wanted a subfolder called images, and I have an existing image here I'm going to load. There are my pictures, and this is going to do. And let's go edit the templates now to refer to the style sheet. I'm just going to copy paste from my tutorial. So load static files and then load the style sheet. Do that in all three. And we'll run. Okay, we can see our background image and the text is blue, so this is all working as expected. Let me show you quickly how you can use the debugger. So of course you can put breakpoints in your Python code. We'll put one here when loading the index, and I'll hit run. And we hit the breakpoint as expected. But what's even more interesting is that we can put breakpoints inside our template. So if I go to index.html, put a breakpoint here, hit continue, I hit that breakpoint, and I can see in my locals window the latest poll list that's getting passed into the template with the poll text. And I can step. So here I'm looking at a particular poll with the published date, the question. I'll hit continue. You can see the page has loaded. Now let's look at how we could move away from using the SQLite 3 database and use a database that's running on Windows Azure. Then after that, once that's working, we'll move the website to run on Windows Azure. So here I'm looking at a portal. At my databases, it says I don't have any, so I'm going to create one. I'll call it tutorial. Now it's asking me for the server. I don't have one yet. I'll call it tutorial user. Say Azure $123. And we're going to pick a region, West US, and that's important to pick the same region for the database and the server that hosts the website. So that doesn't take too long to create. And we're going to go back to Visual Studio and install the packages we need to talk to SQL Server and set up the database's settings. Okay, so let's look up our virtual environment. We need to install two packages. First one, PyODBC, and I'm gonna use easy install for that. Elevation prompt. And that's installed. Next, Django PyODBC Azure. And we can use pip for that one. And that's installed. Now let's go change our database settings. I'm going to change the engine. So the name, the database name, that's tutorial. User is tutorial user. At server name. Now I don't remember what that was. Let's go back. We can look up our server here. Hopefully I can copy paste from here. There we go. Password. That's Azure $123. Host is the server name again. .database.windows.net. Port we don't need to set. We'll set options. And those will be the driver. Native client. Now, depending on what you have installed on your machine, you might need to use version 10.0 instead of 11.0. But when running on Windows Azure, you want it to be 11.0. And now we can go and say synchronize. And I expect we'll get an error. And that's because by default Windows Azure doesn't let you connect from outside of Windows Azure. So we need to pick up this IP address here, go back to the portal, go to the server, configure, and tell it to allow this IP address. save. Now let's try it again. Just scroll down and it's creating the table, so that's working fine. Yes. Tutorial 1, 2, 3. So this password is for the Django admin panel, not to be confused with the password for the database itself. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now we're going to want to populate that database with some polls next. So previously we used the admin interface to add a new poll, but you can do it programmatically pretty easily using the Django console. So if I say open Django shell here, I'll just clear that screen. We can actually talk to our database from here. From polls.models, import poll choice, Django.utils, import time zone, and we'll create a new poll. I'll say the question is favorite way to host Django on Azure, and the publish date is now. Save that. We'll need to add some choices. Say create with a text. First option will be website. Second option, we'll say cloud service. And let's say virtual machine for people that want to do their own deployment manually. Okay. And now we can have some fun here exploring our models. So we can say poll.objects.all. It shows me a list of all of them. There's only one. p.id is one. p.choice set.all. All of our choices, and we can get by ID. So IntelliSense here in the console is live against the objects, so it's slightly better than the one you would get when you're writing your code. So it's a good way to experiment and figure out what the API looks like. So now let's run this, and we should see that poll. Oh, I still have my breakpoint from earlier. It's good to see that still works. Oh, my Internet Explorer. Favorite way to host Django on Azure. And let's say virtual machine for now. And that worked. So next we're going to see how we can deploy our website to Windows Azure. From PTVS 2.0, you have two easy deployment options built right in Visual Studio. So one is publishing to website and the other is publishing to cloud service. Let's look at how you can publish to website. So on the project node you can say publish, and the user interface is going to look a little bit different depending on which version of Visual Studio you have and depending on which version of the Azure SDK you have installed. So this is using Visual Studio 2013 with the Azure SDK 2.2. So first we have to tell it which subscription we're using. So I'm going to say import subscription, certificate, import. Now normally you'd be able to sign in, but right now my account isn't set up to work with that feature yet because we haven't released yet, so I need to go the more manual way, which is still going to work later. So download subscription file. My IE here is trying to save a file. That's good. Let's go back, say browse. It's going to be in my downloads. Import. Tell it to use my free trial. So now here we can actually say new, and without going to the Azure portal, create the website right here. So, unfortunately that's taken. What about Azure tutorial? Azure PTVS tutorial. There we go. So I'm going to pick West US because that's where my database is. And actually those database settings are not useful for us Django users. I'll just say create. Okay. I'll actually test the connection. Hit next. Next. I can preview, but there's like thousands of files. It's going to deploy the virtual environment with Django, so that's going to take a little while. We're going to say publish. So if we look at the output here, it's interesting. What I mentioned earlier is that we collect all the static files, so you can see that it's being done here, and so you don't have to manually use a Django console to do that. And it created a web config for you, and it's going to publish all the files in your project, your virtual environment. And when it's done, it's going to open a browser automatically. But we're going to skip ahead now and come back when it's done. And we're back. The publish has succeeded. It tells us it published to this address, but it opened IE for me automatically. And we can see from the address it's running on Windows Azure in a website. I can click on it. I'm going to say that my favorite way to host Django is through Azure website, and vote for website. That worked successfully. Now let's see how we could publish to a Windows Azure Cloud Service instead. So for this to work, you absolutely need the Azure tools or Azure SDK installed. And that's going to give you a command when you right click on the menu, and here again it changes based on the version of Visual Studio or which version of the Azure tools you have installed. It might be directly in the menu here as convert to Windows Azure Cloud Service Project, or create Cloud Service Project over here in 2013, and Azure Tools 2.2. That's how you do it. That's going to create a second project in the solution. So let me minimize some of these so we can see. And now if you right click on that project that it created and say publish, then it's a Windows Azure publish signing that you get. I'm going to say publish to my free trial again. Now it asks me which cloud service. I don't have one created that I want to use right now, so we'll say, let's say PTVS tutorial cloud service and West US again. So you can read up on Windows Azure to see what the differences are between cloud service and website and which one is a better fit for you. One option that you have with cloud service that you don't with website is enable remote desktop. So I don't need to do that now, but if you ever have trouble debugging your Django project here, by having remote desktop enabled, you can actually get into the machine and see what's going on over there. But there's other debugging and tracing capabilities built into both website and cloud service, which you can access through the Windows Azure portal. So I'll say next, I'll hit publish. Again, you can see it's collecting the static. It's done it before, so it says 0 static files copied. And now that's going to take a little while, even usually a little bit longer than websites. And when we come back, we'll vote for cloud service, hopefully. And we're back. The publish has completed. You can see there's this tool window that popped up after the package was created and when it started uploading it, and it gives you the status and the website URL. It didn't actually open the URL in Internet Explorer automatically, so I'll just click here and that will do it. And you can see we're running on our cloud service address. I'll say cloud service, and that worked. In this video, we saw how easy it can be to create a Django application using Python tools for Visual Studio and publish it to Windows Azure. For more information on Windows Azure, see windowsazure.com. For more information and downloads for PTVS, see pytools.codeplex.com. Note that PTVS is also available for download directly from within Visual Studio 2013. Thanks for watching.